Tonight we're in Birmingham. Welcome to Question Time. And as ever, a big welcome to you at home and a welcome to our audience here who are going to be putting the questions, which, of course, our panel do not know until they hear them from the lips of our audience. The Conservative Party chairman, Grant Shapps, is with us. Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. The leader of the Liberal Democrats in Wales, Kirsty. The political director of the website Huffington Post UK, Mehdi Hasan. And the political sketch writer for the Daily Mail, Quentin Letts. Thanks very much. So let's get cracking. A question from Alison Swain, please, to start with.
Is stopping benefits for young people really the best way of getting them into work, education or training?
This is David Cameron's speech and the proposal that in the next manifesto, everyone under 25 earning or learning, not doing nothing. Yvette Cooper.
Well, I think we do need to get young people into jobs, and something has to be done. The government should be doing something about unemployment among the under-25s. You've seen youth unemployment go up to around 1 million, and long-term youth unemployment has gone up by a third just since the election. Something does have to be done, but this announcement we've had just seems to be policy-making on the hoof. It seems to be very confused. The real answer, I think, is to get people into jobs. That's what we would do, that's what Labour would do. Guarantee young people a job. Then if they don't take it up, if they can't find themselves an alternative and they won't take up a guaranteed job that we would give them, we would fund for them, then, yes, they should have
How do you guarantee someone a job? How can you possibly guarantee someone a job?
Well, of course you can. What we would do is we would raise the funds from a tax on bankers' bonuses. We've said how we would pay for it, and you would work with employers, and we've done it before through things like the Future Jobs Fund, and you actually make sure that there is a guaranteed job for people to go to.
You mean there are employers who will always take on, at Labour's behest, if you're the government, anybody who comes to them?
Well, we've done this
under the age of 25.
We've done this before with the Future Jobs Fund.
With 100% success?
With the Future Jobs Fund, it was extremely successful.
100% success?
Yeah, even the Department for Work and Pensions said it was successful. And what you could do is you work more with the private sector, work with businesses across the country, and do that. Guarantee people a job. Then, of course, if they won't take it, there will be responsibilities on people. They have to actually take that job, and you can't have people then being stuck on benefits for a long time.
So you would stop their benefit if they refuse?
Yes, you would have penalties.
So you're also in the stopping benefits business. But you guarantee people a job. The
problem I have with what the government's doing is that there's no effort to guarantee people a job. There's no effort to make sure there's a job for people to go to. They can't answer the basic questions about whether this withdrawal of benefits will apply to care leavers who don't have a home to go back to, whether it will apply to somebody who's worked, a graduate who's worked for several years and then loses their job. Will they suddenly lose everything? Will it apply to people who are looking after children, parents of children? And so they really, we've had muddled answers from them, could be completely counterproductive, and to be doing this in such a chaotic way and doesn't get to the heart of the problem. Can you guarantee people a job? That's what we should be doing, getting those young people into a work and not having another lost generation.
Thank you very much. I have to say we had more questions on this topic tonight than on anything else. Grant Shapps, the Prime Minister said we should ask as we write our next manifesto, and the implication was this was going to become policy. Is that right?
Yes, what we're saying is if you are currently working, the chances are, and you're under 25, chances are you're struggling to move out of home. You certainly won't be able to get the deposit together, though our Help to Buy scheme will certainly help. You probably can't move out and rent. There's a strange paradox that actually if you're not working, then the system will give you housing benefit to enable you to go and rent that flat. That cannot be right, that you're put at a disadvantage by not working, and this measure is aimed at both sorting that out and also making sure that people are able to get onto the work ladder straight away, either earning or learning from a young age, because all the evidence shows that when people do that, they have much better outcomes throughout the rest of their lives.
But how are you going to get people into a job?
So we're going to have, we've got the work programme, which is
not working.
No, the work programme's worked twice as...
No, it's not working.
Let me just answer, you've asked the question, I'm getting you the facts. The work programme has worked twice as well as the flexible New Deal that it's replaced. It has got a lot of people into jobs for the first time. If after 3 years people are still not in jobs, We don't think it's good enough just to leave people on the scrap heap, say, sorry, we're not interested in you anymore. We are still interested in them. We're going to do one of three things. We're going to ask them to come to the job centre every day so that they are properly engaged with the jobs market. We'll help them to get there if transport's the issue, make sure they're looking for a job every day. We're going to help out if there are any long-term issues. For example, if it's a problem of literacy, for example, that's preventing somebody from getting a job, then we will intensively work on that subject.
But you should have done all of that before. You'll wait for 3 years before you give people intensive literacy help, intensive support.
Let me finish.
And you'll make them just fill the job centres. How big is this job centre going to be
Let me finish, I'll
that you're going to put everybody into rather than getting them jobs?
If you know, coming from the government that left 1 million people just unemployed for a decade at a time.
Up by a third. Youth long-term unemployment.
Why don't we deal with the facts? Let me finish the answer. Finish the answer.
There are a number of people with their hands up.
The third thing is, if somebody is still not working but claiming unemployment, then they should work for the community and put something back into the community for 30, 35 hours a week and spend the rest of the time looking for a job. Look, I don't think it's good enough to leave people on the scrap heap, ignore them as if they don't matter. We have been successful, and even you will have to admit, having claimed that there'd be 1 million people more out of work, we've got the most people in work at any time in this country.
Grant, just one thing. This is designed to save money in the long term, isn't it? So that you're not paying people.
In the short term, this is
How much are you going to save? I've got a figure of £2 billion a year is the idea.
So, look, everybody who works is always going to be much better, both for them and for society and for the Treasury, than someone who does not work. What we're doing here is signalling that in the next manifesto, this is something that we would want to pursue. And I can tell you, we would not include people who are on ESA, for example. That's when people are disabled, unable to work, and so on.
And you've got to wait because the Liberal Democrats won't go along with it.
Although I do see Nick Clegg has said today he'd be interested to look at the proposal in more detail. Look, I just don't think it's acceptable to leave people on the scrap heap, assume they can't work, and just go on as if we don't care about it.
I'll come to the Liberal Democrat view, Kirsty, in a moment. Let's just hear from some members of our audience. You sit up there in the second row from the back.
Thank you. The argument seems to be coming round again to job creation. As an accountant, the biggest problem that we still have today is raising finance from the bankers. What is the answer to that, please? So
you think job creation it's not possible, not feasible in the present?
No. Well, the argument is we need to create more jobs to give to these young people. That sounds fantastic. Okay. The reality of it is small and medium-sized businesses want to create jobs. We need the finance from the bankers to do that. How are we going to resolve it?
Well, can we just hold on to that point? Let me hear from one or two other people, and then we'll get an answer to that. The woman there in the back, in the very back row.
Will this proposed measure not lead to higher levels of homelessness?
Exactly. No, look, if you are in work, right, at the moment, if you're in work and under 25, if you know anyone in that category, you'll know that they're probably struggling to move to their own place. That doesn't lead to homelessness in itself. They actually live in their family homes until they're able to. What is wrong in the current system is if you're out of work, you're currently able to move out at taxpayers' expense. And that can't be right. In answer to the other gentleman's point, we've managed to get created in the private sector 1.4 million jobs since this government came to power just 3 years ago. It far exceeds what people expected to happen. It massively replaces, but many times over, the number lost in the private sector.
Okay.
This country
Grant,
reduce jobs.
You're being properly answering all
the questions.
But I don't want you to dominate the whole discussion. Kirsty Williams.
Well, we do need more jobs. The current coalition government has created 1.4 million jobs in the private sector, but we need more. And Vids Cable and other coalition colleagues have tried to create an opportunity for banks to lend more money, but there's more that the banks could be doing. We have aspirations for 1 million more jobs. Of course, no government would not want 18 to 25-year-olds in work. So we have to tackle the problems of why they don't end up in work. We need jobs for them. We need training for them. This coalition government has created 1.2 million apprentices so that people can have that workplace learning. And we have to recognise the people who are most likely to end up in this category are children from our poorest backgrounds. And we have to get their education right, because currently too many of them are leaving school without the skills they need to enter into the workplace or carry on their education.
Why do you oppose the Conservative proposal?
Because I think it stereotypes the reasons why 18 to 24-year-olds, potentially actually become unemployed. I remember I graduated university during the recession of the 90s, and I struggled to find a job. Luckily for me, I was able to go home to my family, and they were able to help me until 6 months later I was able to find work when the economy began to get a little bit better. We stereotype people. We don't know the circumstances of individuals. Of course, if people turn down the offer of help that's available, then there should be sanctions for that. We already have that in our benefit system with issues around conditionality. But we've got to get pupils from our poorest backgrounds leaving school with the right skills, and that's why pupil premium is so important.
OK. The woman there on the right, and then I'll come to you down here. Yes.
It's good that however many jobs have been created by this government.
We need more.
But they need to be full-time, worthwhile jobs.
Yep.
Not...
Quentin Letts.
Not just a few hours a week at the local supermarket where the person still has not enough money to live on.
My feeling about this is it's a question of economic reality. One can talk about creating jobs or the desirability of youngsters being in jobs. Of course, it's desirable. But the welfare bill in this country is enormous. It's too big. We can't afford it anymore. We spend more on benefits than we do on defence, than we do on education.
A good thing.
Than we do on the police. Even we spend more on welfare than we even do on the BBC. So this is a problem that we have to grip. And we can't just go on ignoring it anymore, because that's what's happened in the past. The politicians haven't been honest about the sums. And that's why we've got this horrendous debt problem in this country. Now, it's terribly difficult to reduce spending on benefits because many people are very needy. But my personal prejudice on this would be, if you have to pick on one group of people, I would rather, reluctantly say this, but I would rather reduce spending on youngsters than I would on reducing spending on the elderly, say. And there is evidence, I think, that Ian Duncan Smith's programme of welfare reform is it's reducing the unemployment, the people claiming unemployment. Employment's going up. The private sector's played a blinder. An awful lot of jobs have been created in the private sector. And Yvette talked about another lost generation. Well, if it's another lost generation, that shows there is one at the moment, which shows that the system isn't
I remember what happened in the 1980s.
At the moment.
Margaret Thatcher's lost generation.
But this is very different this time.
Devastating for Britain. Well, it's not different this time. You've got long-term youth unemployment going up and up, and that's young people stuck on the dole for years on end.
Let me have my say. It is different this time because unemployment is falling and employment is rising. And so, it's a heck of a task to reduce the welfare bill. But if you had to do it for anyone, then I'd say... And there's this very good Labour policy of the national minimum wage, which means that jobs are paying better than they were in the Thatcher days.
Right, you, sir.
Quentin has actually made most of my point there. It doesn't make sense to keep on borrowing to spend money on welfare. If you're borrowing to investing on... I think the Prime Minister said, earn or learn. So the intention is to put these people to learning if they can't get a job. So it doesn't make sense to keep borrowing money. Absolutely. Who's ever going to pay? Who's going to pay the money back? Absolutely. Because the budget is in deficit. There's a deficit of about £100 billion a month, and that keeps on going up and up. So you have to cut the welfare budget from somewhere.
Mehdi Hasan, would you like to address
that
in
response to this gentleman and to Quentin, just very quickly. First of all, call me old-fashioned. I think it's a good thing that we spend more money on poor and vulnerable in our country than we do on defence and foreign wars. I happen to think that's a good thing. Second of all, the majority of the welfare budget in this country goes to pensioners, not to people on housing benefits, to Daily Mail readers, dare I say. And the third point is this. It wasn't people on housing benefit who caused the banking crash and gave us our deficit. It wasn't the long-term unemployed who made themselves unemployed and caused a global financial crisis. So I'm not sure why they should have to pick up the bill. Look, to address the original question that was asked, I'm always amused when I hear David Cameron talking about this subject, a man who's never had to worry about having a roof over his head, whose first job out of university whose first job out of university at Conservative Central Office he got thanks to a phone call from Buckingham Palace that put in a good word for him. So I'm always amused when he lectures young people on job prospects or housing situations. He told people in a speech, young people, you should go to school, even though his government got rid of the education maintenance allowance that keeps poor kids in school. He told young people to go to university, even though his government brought in £9,000 a year tuition fees. He told young people... He had a third option as well. He told young people to get apprenticeships, even though on his government's watch, apprenticeships have gone down by 12%.
No, all right, no, I want to go back.
Just not
Mehdi,
true.
just
Do you suggest to bring down the welfare budget, then?
I would take my dear friend the accountant's point. I never thought I'd agree with the accountant here. You have to bring jobs in. There are 2.5 million unemployed people in this country. There are 500,000 vacancies. How do you squeeze 5 people into one job? Until we can answer that question, stop blaming the unemployed for being unemployed.
Mehdi, this is good populist stuff, but look, this country suffers a deficit so large...
Caused by people on housing?
No, wait,
Let him answer, Mehdi, you've had your say.
Suffers a deficit so loud, no matter how it was caused. You can blame it on bankers. I personally think that the previous government had a lot to do with it. The solution to it cannot be yet more borrowing,
more jobs,
spending, more debt. And on the jobs front, as we've already... Let me just get the answer out here, Mehdi. On the jobs front, at least we have, and it's undeniable, reduced a lot of jobs in this economy.
You mustn't interrupt every other word, nor must you, Grant, interrupt him when he's speaking.
Okay,
one at a time is much better, because then people listening and interested can hear the argument instead of just hearing the rant.
Can I just at least correct one fact? There are more apprenticeships, 1.2 million more apprenticeships since this government came to power. The employment actually is at an all-time record at nearly 30 million people in this country, and despite what we were told when we started to reduce that deficit, we've cut a third off the deficit so far, work in progress. When we started to reduce the deficit, we were told by Labour it would create 1 million more unemployed. It has not. At least, please accept you're part in the process in the first place, and that the outcome has the work programme is working.
3.6%. According to the Public Accounts Committee, the work programme has got 3.6% of the people on the scheme into work.
No, that's all right. You're quoting out-of-date figures from when it first started.
You're quoting the work programme is working, that's what you said.
It is, but you're quoting figures from the first year of the programme, not where we're up to now.
Just people will be switching off in droves if we get into an argument about whether 3.6 is right. Yvette Cooper, briefly, on the substantial point about cutting welfare that the gentleman there made. What do you say to him?
Yeah, I think the best way to cut the social security bills is to get more people into work. And that means we've got to invest in those young people. We've got to get them into jobs. We've said how we'd pay for it. We would tax the bankers' bonuses because we think actually that is a fair way to do it. No, we haven't actually, Grant. And so I think that is the right way to do it. And that will deliver returns for years to come as you get those people to stay in jobs, because once you know is that if people don't get that first job, it is so much harder to get the next job later on. Grant is turning his back on them. We've had 3 wasted years. We've had 3 wasted years from this government, and youth long-term unemployment, which is the serious problem, has gone up by a third.
The gentleman here in the front here.
I'm really concerned that as a teacher in a secondary school in Birmingham, I hear people on the panel saying that we should reduce funding and support to young people. I think that is frightening, really. What we've got to do is invest in our young people at the early stage possible, particularly at secondary schools, so we can give them a passport to success. And that passport to success are good qualifications that they can go out in the wild world and achieve. And I think it's depressing to hear that we want to cut.
Do you think there are circumstances? Sorry, I want to go back to a question. Do you think there are circumstances when stopping benefits to under 25s would be justified? Or are you saying in no circumstance?
Well, I think really, as one who works with young people, I think we should support at every opportunity.
That's not answering the question quite. Do you think there are any circumstances in which benefits should be cut?
No.
No, OK.
But I do think, with regards to what I've heard with regards to pupil premium, which is something that really assists us in closing the gap in people who are on free school meals, so that we have consistency from the front door to school and back home, that they're in the same level playing field.
We've got a lot of questions.
It's absolutely vital, and it makes a massive difference, because we know that those are the children who are most likely not to get the qualifications they need to make their way in life. If we educate people properly and give them opportunities to train and a job, they'll keep their own roof over their head, and they'll provide for their family. And that's why we've got to get education right and focus on our youngest people.
We've had a quarter of our time, we must move on to another question. Just to say, text or Twitter is at your disposal, of course, tonight. If you want to argue the case, our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments on 83981, please. Use the red button to follow what others are saying. And now let's have this question from Amit Clare, please.
Has the Daily Mail gone too far with its smear attack against Ed Miliband's father?
Has the Daily Mail gone too far with their smear attack on Ed Miliband's father? Grant Shapps.
Yeah, I think if this was an attack on my dad, I would feel pretty upset about it and want a right to reply, which I know he's had. I think that they certainly went too far with the particular headline they used online. The Mail on Sundays apologised for something else, which remarkably happened after all this had come to life, come to everyone's attention, which was to send journalists quite inappropriately to a memorial service, and they've apologised unreservedly for that. I do think that it's right that there's a vibrant press in this country. I do think that there are too many reasons to try to restrict it. I have to say that I've had occasion to be annoyed with newspapers many times over, including the Mail, actually. But in the end, it doesn't make me conclude that we should bring in some sort of draconian law to prevent them. I do think that this is a work in progress. Of course, the whole process of Leveson and everything that comes afterwards is still ongoing. And next week, actually, there's a Privy Council meeting where they'll be looking at the newspaper's suggestion for a royal charter on this, which may or may not stack up. But I have serious concerns about what happened, but I also don't want to then knee-jerk into preventing press freedom.
Do you think that the Mail should apologise?
They have.
No, the Mail on Sundays apologised.
Oh, the Mail on Sunday.
I quote the Mail, an evil legacy and why we won't apologise, is what they wrote on Tuesday. And I noticed Michael Gove, your colleague, saying that he didn't think there was any reason for the Mail to do anything.
Well, look, as I say...
what you got with the Free Press.
Well, look, as I say, on a personal level, if that was my dad, I would feel pretty aggrieved about it.
But that's slightly different, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think then what you have to have is a route of redress. And the route of redress is being able to get something published in the paper. Certainly everybody knows about it now. I don't want to, as I've said, I don't want a knee-jerk, which is you then go to the next stage, which is saying they cannot write what they want. And there is, of course, the perfectly legitimate question to ask of, you know, what drives somebody's motives, who inspired all of us who are in politics, what made us get into politics. The greater concern for me in all of this, frankly, is what would Ed Miliband be like as a Prime Minister, as far as I can see. Go back to what we've just been discussing, the spending, borrowing and debt that got us into this mess in the first place, and to the extent that that was guided by things in his upbringing, I think that's interesting. But I do not accept that his father was somehow anti-British, and I don't think that using the diary of somebody as a teenager is an appropriate way to judge the man who now would like to be Prime Minister.
Quentin Letts, you've been writing for the Mail one way or another for the last 2000, since 12 years.
I thought you were going to say 2,000 years, but it feels like that sometimes. When I heard this story today about the behaviour of the Mail on Sunday reporter, I was put in mind of the Emperor Hirohito of Japan in 1945, who said that events in the war had turned not necessarily to the advantage of Japan, and I will not defend the indefensible. And that behaviour was clearly indefensible. And I'm glad that the Mail on Sunday has apologised for that. And Lord Rothermere, owner of Associated Newspapers, has written to Ed Mill to apologise quite rightly. But I will try, possibly to my own disadvantage, try to defend what I think is very much the defendable.
Let's just explain that the thing that was apologised for was sneaking a couple of reporters into a private memorial service at Guy's Hospital. And that the Mail on Sunday's editor has apologised for, and
the headline
in the Mail.
Yeah, but the Mail on Sunday, different paper from the Mail. I will try to defend the defendable, because I think it is the coverage of, or the essay that was written about Ed Miliband's dad. Because you need to know, first of all, I think, that Ed Miliband, in every speech I've heard him make, refers to his father, who was a very prominent intellectual, philosopher, a Marxist. And this was, he was perhaps what they call about the useful idiots sometimes. The people who were promoting Marxism at a time of the Cold War, when Britain was up against Russia, and Marxism was the code, the creed of the Soviet Union. Now, it's difficult to analyse somebody's political beliefs without coring into their personality as well. And this article was doing that. So I would say that because Ed Miliband uses his dad in his speeches as a political tool, if you like, I think that makes him, particularly after the sort of speech he gave in his party conference, which was wildly left-wing and Marxist-based, I would argue. I think... Well, Hank sure was.
I think his dad was wishing
he was proposing, among other things, the theft of private land.
Which is supported by the International Monetary Fund, those well-known Marxists.
Mehdi... Let me just try and get my...
Quentin, just pick up on the phrase that really got...
the phrase that got everyone going is that he was...
the man who hated Britain.
Yes, now, this was the headline on the piece. Tabloid newspaper headlines are not always understated. And it was saying the man who hated Britain. Did he hate Britain? Well, the 17-year-old wrote in a diary something about how he thought he wouldn't mind if Britain lost the Second World War. 17-year-old boy writes that. I think we can all accept that a 17-year-old boy might change his mind later on. But he was much older, Ralph Miliband, this is the father of Ed, when it came to the Falklands War. And he was furious that we won the Falklands War. He wanted us to lose the Falklands War. Now, is that the behaviour of a man who loves his country? I'm not sure it is.
Right.
And I just feel that it's a point of view, isn't it? It's an essay, it's a political argument. This was from the authorised biography of Ralph Miliband. It's not as though any bins are being routed through like the Sunday Mirror once did to David Cameron.
Kirsty,
and so therefore I think it was a strong piece, it was a controversial piece. The Daily Mail is a controversial and strong newspaper, but was it really completely out of order? I'm not sure it was.
Quentin.
Well,
all right, okay, you're done. Kirsty.
Quentin, this is a man who fought for his country.
Yeah.
The country that he didn't have to fight for, but he chose to do that, and that, in my mind, equates to somebody who cares very deeply about the country that they live in. You're right to say, as politicians, sometimes we're all guilty of it. We put our families out there in a desperate attempt to make ourselves look a little bit more human and a little bit more normal. And sometimes the press then have an opportunity to reflect on that. But there's a world of difference, isn't there, between examining the beliefs of Ed Miliband and the belief and the influence his father may or may not have had on him, and that odious headline about how he hated the country, based on, as you quite rightly say, a diary entry of a 17-year-old, and let's face it, we've all said and written daft things when we're 17. It was wrong to conflate that story, which is a legitimate look at how a father influences a son, into an odious headline, and Ed Miliband has got every right to call the Daily Mail out on it.
OK, you, sir.
Is the press's maturity under question here? In that they are smearing someone's father. No one's father... You wouldn't want your father, no one here would want their father smeared in the newspaper publicly. And I really don't think it is anyone's business talking about...
If it was a smear, but Quentin Letts saying it wasn't a smear, it was an accurate description of him.
But David, it was a view, it was a political argument.
All right, Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper.
I mean, Quentin Letts has said, and the Daily Mail has said, and he's repeated it again this evening, that Ralph Miliband hated Britain. And I just think this is shocking, to decide to pursue and distort and twist the words of a dead father in order to pursue an attack on a son. I think it's about basic standards of decency. You don't do that. You don't twist the words of a father in that way when he's not able to pursue a libel case, he's not able to reply himself. You also don't go and gate crash a private memorial service for a dead uncle in order to continue to pursue that attack on the son. And this idea as well, I think that, you know, look, none of us panellists have fought for our country or joined the Navy in order to sign up for our country, and I doubt that very many people on the Mail have done so either. And I think people who have not served their country and fought for their country should really think twice about deciding that they have a monopoly on caring for this country and determining British values over someone who fought for British values when British values were really at stake.
Do you think... Do you think Paul Dacre should resign?
Well, I think he should certainly apologise. I think he should apologise very swiftly for this. And I really think the dignified thing as well for Quentin to do and for Paul Dacre to do is to recognise what male readers are saying, as well as, you know, all the political parties, and recognise that this went too far and apologise now.
I mean, it's been a bizarre week, even by journalistic standards. Last Saturday, the Mail publishes a piece headlined, "The Man Who Hated Britain." On Tuesday, they published this bonkers leader saying he's got an evil legacy, referring to the jealous god of Deuteronomy. On Thursday, the Mail on Sunday on Wednesday, a Mail on Sunday reporter goes to gate crash a dead uncle's memorial. I mean, what next? Grave robbing? I'm just wondering where you draw the line in going after...
Actually, where the poor man is buried came into the story. Well, some kind of weird conspiracy. Because he's buried at Highgate, he must be a bad person.
That's the only thing they've apologised for so far. Look, there's been a grave misjudgment, a deeply hypocritical judgment on the part of the Mail here in asking these questions and posing these issues. Let me ask you this question. When you talk about who hates Britain or who has an evil legacy, who do you think has an evil legacy? A man who sucked up to the Nazis, who made friends with Joseph Goebbels and praised Hitler in the run-up to World War II, the owner and founder of the Daily Mail, Lord Rothermere, or a man who served in the Royal Navy, risked his life for his adopted homeland, Ralph Miliband? Who do you think hated Britain more? And this isn't just about Ralph Miliband, actually, because it's actually opened up a whole debate about the Daily Mail. You want to talk about who hates Britain? But this is a paper... Quentin, let me finish, then you come back in. This is a paper that in recent years said that there was nothing natural about the death of the gay pop star Stephen Gately, who said that the French people should vote for Marine Le Pen and the National Front, who attacked Danny Boyle for having a mixed-race couple in his Olympics opening ceremony, who called Mo Farah a plastic Brit. So let's have the debate about who hates Britain more, because it isn't a dead Jewish refugee from Belgium who served in the Royal Navy. It's the immigrant-bashing, woman-hating, Muslim-smearing, NHS-undermining, gay-baiting Daily Mail and the Paul Dacre. And if that gets me a hat-trick job...
All right, Mehdi,
and if I'm a hat-trick job, so be it.
We really... I think we can't really let this stuff go through without mentioning, at least, that Mehdi's mates on the left, when Lady Thatcher died, were doing an awful lot of grave dancing then. I mean, there's been some... Well, I'm glad to hear you say that.
That was awful.
I mean, working with...
Mehdi, you've had a long speech.
Okay.
Just let Quentin Letts answer.
Working for the Daily Mail, you're never going to be a favourite of the left. You're never going to be a favourite of bishops and princes and kings and prime ministers. The Daily Mail is outside the political village. It is... Well, it is. I mean, there's the old expression about, outside the tent. That's the Mail. And... we don't get invited on the Mail to all the sort of cosy Lord Levy's dinner parties or David Cameron's dinner parties. And the Mail tries to stand up for what its readers are interested in and its readers' points of view. And the Mail was being attacked today by Nick Clegg, for instance. Well, Cleggy was calling us all sorts of terribly rude things. But maybe that's because we in the past have been pretty brisk on him. John Prescott was having a go at us. Well, that's Prescott.
Gordon Brown loved you, didn't he?
Gordon
Brown. I have a wonderful quote from Gordon Brown, which you ought to plays to your cause. Paul Dacre, he said, has delivered one of the great newspaper success stories. He also shows great personal warmth and kindness, as well as journalism. You're looking a bit disapproving of it as I read this out.
Yes, it just shows, I mean, I'm allowed to disagree from the Daily Mail line. Perhaps I always took a slightly less positive view of Gordon. But, I mean, who else was attacking us? Prescott, John Prescott.
Heseltine.
Was
Lord
attacking
Moore,
us.
Tory.
Heseltine doesn't like the Mail particularly its view on Europe. We don't tend to approve of the European Union. We don't approve of HS2.
Charles Moore has attacked you for doing this.
We don't. There are lots of things. We don't approve of political correctness. That makes us slightly unpopular. So, if you say things like that in Britain, we don't approve of the BBC particularly, those £1 million payoffs to BBC executives. So...
Is that because you hate Britain?
All right, now, look, OK.
When you say things...
Can you bring this to a close? I think we've got your point, too.
But, Quentin, you've worked in the political village for very many years.
There was a massive amount of applause when Mehdi was making his points against. I want to hear from somebody who will speak for, and I suspect the gentleman who applauded just then might the Mail. You, sir.
Yeah, I think rather Ed Miliband shot himself in the foot, actually, in Brighton when he stood on the soapbox and said, I'm going to bring socialism back. I don't want socialism in this country. I'm a capitalist, and I believe in capitalism because we need wealth makers to feed the budgets for schools, teachers, everything that goes in local council. So bring it on. I don't want socialism. And I believe in a free press. I don't like some of the things that go on. I mean, my own party, who I belong to, we have loads of smears all the time. We just ride them off, yeah?
Which is your party?
UKIP. But the fact of the matter is... Well... the fact of the matter is, we are all, in some ways, following from our parents' views, yes? And I think it's important for this country to realise just what socialism does and has done, and the far we've removed away from socialism, the better.
And did you think that did you think that the attack on Rafe Miliband was fair in the Mail?
I haven't actually read it. I've only gone what's said on the media.
Right.
Attacking family members, no.
Okay.
But it is important that the influences from parents is brought to fore.
That's fine, and you can have that debate, and you can argue in the newspapers whether what Ed Miliband has said is right or wrong, and I don't want to go back to socialism either. But the way in which they've approached that, I think, has not brought any good things for the Mail, and actually just brings everybody down. It makes the whole media...
The Mail won't fold.
The woman with spectacles there has been trying to get in for some time. Yes, that's you.
OK, so I have several points to make, so I'm going to have to...
Oh, no, not several, please. Just make
OK, I'll make one.
But choose your best point and make one.
OK, so I've been listening to Quentin Letts continuously justify that disgusting smear as an essay. It was not an essay. It was frankly disgusting anti-Semitic slander over a dead man. But we mustn't disassociate this from the Mail's normal conduct. This is what the Mail normally does. It normally demonises people from marginalised groups, and they do this to legitimise the dominant class's ideology, for that's in their benefit.
Okay.
They profit out of demonising people. And I think we're taking the wrong question by saying, OK, about, who actually loved Britain or hated Britain. It doesn't really matter, because, to be honest, it would still be a disgusting anti-Semitic piece, whether or not Ralph Miliband
All right, thank you very much for the point. Grant Shapps.
I just think it's very important that we apply the same standards to everyone and all newspapers, left or right. And I'm disappointed I didn't hear the sort of outrage that we heard before from Mehdi when The Guardian attacked David Cameron's father after he passed away in a completely spurious piece, or The Mirror went through the dustbins of David Cameron and to unearth the nappies of his disabled son, who's also passed away now. It seems to me that this should apply across the field. I don't, as I say, personally favour the kind of press restrictions which would prevent a vibrant free press, indeed from us having the sort of debate and argument that's taken place tonight, many of the points of which I agree with, but I do think it should be applied across the field.
And when it comes to regulation of the press, are you in favour of the policy that the Daily Mail supports of having virtually no control on the press, or are you in favour of the other thing that is going to be considered?
That's a very misleading question.
We put forward our...
That is... Hang on,
let him answer. He can decide.
We need to point out.
He can decide.
That was a severely loaded question by the chair, because the proposal that's from the newspaper associations about the new press regulations are really pretty tough. They're talking about £1 million fines, and the idea
of the two proposals, the one supported by the Mail and other newspapers and Private Eye and many other people, is the more lenient of the two.
David,
don't argue about that, because that is the case.
There is a danger. I'm trying to keep calm here, but there is a danger that the BBC has an agenda here. The Daily Mail is very critical of the BBC and has been very critical of the BBC's conduct recently with paying off £1 million to its former executives.
Well, don't accuse me of having an agenda chosen for me by the BBC. Thank you very much.
David, you're a member of the establishment and the Mail isn't.
The Mail isn't part of the establishment.
Mail is part of the establishment.
No,
anyway, come back to the question. Quentin, if you just leave it for a moment. Grant Shapps, of the two proposals, are you in favour of the tougher regulation, which is going to be considered, or the slightly less tough regulation?
We've come forward with the tougher regulation, if you
but are you in favour
that way? Well, of course, we wouldn't come forward with it. The question now, this depends on what all the parties and the newspapers get together with. The question now is, and they have to be taken in order, next week the Privy Council looks at the newspaper's version of the Royal Charter. They'll then look at our version, the government's version, of the Royal Charter. There's not actually huge differences here. This is actually down to something quite technical about who appoints the body over the body over the body. Look, the most important thing is to make sure that there is a proper right of redress. But I think we all benefit from living in a country where we can properly debate things, and actually, in the end, the government coming in the future who wants to muzzle the media just does not have that opportunity. Right. I think that's more valuable to us as Brits than anything else in this discussion.
We'll move on now. We'll move on because we've only 20 minutes to go. Neil Dance, please.
Does the recent shift away from the centre by both main parties signify a deepening rift in the fabric of society?
The shift away from the centre by both main parties, talking of Labour and Conservative at their party conferences. Does that signify a deepening rift in the fabric of society? Mehdi Hasan, can you be shorter than you were on the other answer?
I will. I don't buy the premise of the question about this. I think one of the most distorting things in modern politics is this idea of the centre ground, as if it's a geographical place on a map that every politician gets in their car and drives towards. And it seems to be some kind of equidistant point between where the two major parties seem to be at any time. I just don't buy it. Take, for example, what Quentin referred to earlier as a wildly left-wing speech by Ed Miliband last week. If you look at the public polling, the majority of people want to go much beyond Ed Miliband. They want to renationalise the railways. All the polls show a majority of Brits favour renationalisation of the railways, of the energy companies, of the 50p tax rate being brought in on people on 100 grand, not 150 grand. So if we're going to talk about where the centre is, well, the public on many issues, on some they're not. On immigration, I accept, is much to the right of this mythical centre. But on issues like public services and the ownership of these utility companies and treating the bankers and taxation of the rich, public is to the left.
Would you agree
that the two
socialist
agenda?
Would you agree that the two parties had pulled apart a bit over this conference season in terms of the political agenda they were offering?
From each other? Yes, I do think they have. Right. Does that mean they pulled apart from a centre ground? Not necessarily. At least we'll have a proper choice at the next election, as they did in America. In 2012, you had Mitt Romney taking a much more hard-right stand, Barack Obama at least talking in left-wing terms, if not acting in it. So hopefully we'll have a proper good choice at the next election.
Kirsty Williams.
I think the American example is a really bad one. You know, what's happened in Washington at the moment is the lack of cooperation about in the political parties, and that deepening rift in America has caused the government to shut down. I think there has been movement, and it's beginning to be clear what the priorities of both the right and the left are during this conference season, and I think what we do need is an anchoring force in the centre, because I do believe that's where most British people and British voters find themselves. And if we pull apart the opportunity to work together to solve the problems the country is facing, I think what we do is try to ensure that we've got strong economic policies to get us out of this recession and continue to drive the economy drive the economy forward. But we try to do that to ensure that we're also living in a fairer society.
Yvette Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, the debate that we've been having at our conference has been all about the cost of living crisis. I don't think that is a marginal issue. I don't think that's an narrow issue. I don't even think it's just a left-wing issue. I think it is a very mainstream issue that is affecting people right across the country, because prices are going up and up, bills are going up, and wages just aren't keeping up. For the 39 months that David Cameron has been Prime Minister, in 38 of them, prices have gone up by more than wages. And that means, in practice, people are worse off.
What about the question that was asked by Neil Downs? Can you address the question?
So in terms of, Neil's point is that what does that mean for the centre ground? I think that what we're talking about is the centre ground. It is exactly the thing that people across the country, all incomes and all backgrounds, are really worried about. Yes, we are setting out practical things to do about it. So freezing energy bills, for example, for 2 years while we reform the market, increasing free childcare and setting out how we pay for it so that parents can manage to balance work and family life. A tax cut for small businesses.
Yeah, you're doing your agenda again.
But that's what I think that is a practical thing.
So where's the difference?
There is a bigger difference between us and... I think there is a bigger difference, from Mehdi's point, about between us and the Conservatives.
And is the difference, is the gap widening? I think that was the point of the question, wasn't it?
I think, yeah, because we've set out practical things you could do about it. They haven't. And in fact, all they're doing instead is saying that, you should just simply helping those on the highest income. They're the ones that have had the tax cuts. They're ignoring people in the middle. They're ignoring people on lowest income, turning their backs on them. We've had 3 wasted years of no economic growth. Now that the economy is finally growing, there's still a big challenge to make sure that the growth is strong enough, but also, most importantly, to make sure that everybody benefits and you don't have just a small minority benefiting and everybody else being left behind. That's what's unfair.
Grant Shapps.
First of all, to answer the question, I think the answer is that, yes, there is now a very significant difference. Ed Miliband believes there's a total difference between the cost of living and that is in some way not connected at all to the economy growing. We believe that if you want to have a better quality of life for everybody, then you have to grow a bigger economy. And once you've done that, of course, people will all benefit. The idea somehow that Mehdi puts forward that our policies aren't on the popular side is interesting. Welfare that works, so it actually pays to get a job. Popular. An economy where we've cut the deficit by a third. Popular. Immigration cut by a third. Popular. I think we're on the side of the public who want, for example, a European referendum, which we promise and will deliver if we are elected next time. In fact, there's a bill going through Parliament.
If you accept that there has been this widening gap between the two parties, why do you think that's happened? What do you attribute it to?
I think that it is as simple as this. Ed Miliband challenged the unions, who it turned out were accused of fixing a number of selections, 40 Labour selections around the country for candidates for the next election. He stood up to the unions and he said, I'm going to do something about it. A day or two later, so 2 months later, in fact, in the end, he completely capitulated to them when the GMB promised to withdraw £1 million.
So you've stayed still and they've moved away?
So it's very simple. What's happened is he's realised he can't stay in power without the money from his unions. He's turned immediately to try to satisfy their agenda. People want. I didn't interrupt you, Mehdi. People want to know not that their energies will be low for 20 months and go up beforehand and go up afterwards,
but they do want to know that they'll have low energy bills for 2 years.
But their electricity will stay competitive for 20 years, not 20 months. It's kindergarten economics.
The man there, in from the gangway, you, sir.
OK. Unfortunately, we only have one political party in this country. We've got a Liberal wing of the European Party, we've got a Conservative wing of the European Party, we've got a Labour wing of the European Party. 70% of our laws are governed by Europe. All you're arguing about is that little 30%. That's why you're in the centre. That's why people are turned off politics, because there's no difference between the lot of you.
Well,
you might talk about influences, you may talk about this or that, but basically you're only talking about that 30%. You said, Mr. Shapps, about immigration. You've reduced immigration. That is non-EU immigration. What are you doing about European immigration? What are you going to do about those coming from Romania next January?
Sir, I'm happy to have the debate, but it is overall immigration, including EU immigration. And to answer your question, for everyone else watching this, the only way to get a European referendum is to vote Conservative in the next election.
Quentin
You've
Letts.
promised that before, you've not delivered before.
No, we haven't promised that before in the manifesto, and we actually have a bill in Parliament right now.
You promised it before.
No, we didn't, sir. No, you're misquoting history. That was before the Lisbon Treaty was passed, and we did not have that in our manifesto. Let's just get the facts straight if we're going to have this debate.
Quentin Letts.
Was it Neil asked the question about the centre? If we can get back to the question. It's very difficult to say what is centrist in politics. To my mind, the really centrist thing is being realistic about the economy. And in that respect, at the party conference season we've just had, and my goodness, we Sketchwriters are glad that the party conference season is over, the Labour Party went cartwheeling over the horizon to the left. And you can argue, actually, on the economy that UKIP is more central and more in the centre ground now than the Labour Party.
Who defines that?
The person responsible for that, I'm afraid, is a guy called Ed Balls, who's a sort of maniac free spender. Now, at this point, I have to be a little bit careful because Mr. Balls' beloved is next to me, and but he is. Yvette, I don't know what. Do you send him out shopping? Do you entrust him with the household finances? I don't know. I dread to think how much money he spends. And so this is really the defining issue of the party conferences, was that on the economy, Labour has just disappeared over the left-wing horizon.
But if that's what you care about, Quentin, shouldn't you be pointing out that all of the things that we announced at our party conference, we said exactly how we'd fund them, we said exactly how we would pay for them and what we would do. All the things that were announced at the Conservative and Liberal Democrat conference, they didn't say how they'd fund them at all. In fact, they're borrowing £250 billion more, and that's because they haven't got growth, because they have made such a mess of the economic management since the election.
Yes, Yvette, but you keep talking, the Labour Party keeps talking about taxing bankers more. Well, if you talk about that a heck of a lot, the bankers are not going to come to this country. They're going to go elsewhere. And I'm just not convinced that Labour tells the truth about the economy.
The woman in red there.
I think my point really is we hear all the time from the Conservatives about hard-working families. Hard-working families, you can't stop saying the phrase. You bet your bottom dollar we're going to be hard-working families. With tuition fees trebling, with kids staying at home till they're 25, with the soaring energy bills, we will be extremely hard-working families, but I really wish you would change it.
They all say hard-working families. They normally say Britain's hard-working families. That's the cliche. They all...
The man in the check shirt.
Me.
Yes.
Just to come back on the question, I think both of the parties have shifted to the left and the right, respectively, to try and cut off and strangle some of the power that would happen by UKIP and the Liberal Democrats. If we had another hung parliament, then it would really increase the amount of power that these smaller parties would have, and I think that's why they've shifted away.
So you think they've deliberately moved away?
Yeah, I think they've definitely deliberately moved away.
So that the Liberal Democrats will have...
less support and UKIP will have less support.
Yeah. Well, what do you make of that?
Well, look, first of all, briefly, no, Conservatives have stayed exactly where we were. We're on the side of hard-working people, as you say. And the reason I use that line is because actually most people in this country recognise that you can't just magic money from nowhere. Okay. You have to have an economy which generates jobs. It isn't just about trying to divide up the cake that's there. We need to grow the cake in this country to make a bigger economy. And that, well, we have, because we've created the 1.4 million new private sector jobs, quite against what people thought was going to happen. We've gone through the longest recession, at the deepest downturn, which was much worse than people realise.
The economy was growing
twice the size of that in America, and we've had a lot to dig out.
Wasted years.
We've had a lot to dig ourselves out of because of where your government left us.
Thank you. I want to take one more question before we finish. It's another very political question. It's from Eva Quigley, please. Eva Quigley.
Hi. Will David Cameron's Help to Buy policy get young people, like myself, on the housing ladder, or simply inflate the market further and make it harder to buy in the long term?
Are you hoping to get on the housing ladder?
Yes. Well, it's a dream at the moment, but eventually.
And would you use the Help to Buy scheme if you did? Are you thinking of doing that?
No, I'm not. No.
Too expensive, or...?
Yeah, at the moment I'm just saving as much as I possibly can.
Right, so the question is whether, in effect, it will make things worse, because just houses will get more expensive as a result of the policy. Kirsty Williams, this is a coalition policy. What do you think?
I hope that it will enable many people to realise their dream of owning their own property. We have to be mindful. We don't want the policy to result in another bubble on house prices, and that's why the government has given the power and instructed the Bank of England that will review this policy on an annual basis. It's a time-limited policy. After 3 years, it'll require the permission of the Bank of England to continue with it. There are lots of young people who are caught in a trap where they can afford the monthly repayments on a mortgage. Sometimes they're paying more in rent than they would in a mortgage, but it's that deposit, it's getting over the hump of the deposit to secure that home. And if we can help them to do that, I think it's a good thing. It also then takes some pressure off the rented sector for people who either don't want to or are unable to.
If the houses aren't coming on stream, how do you prevent it increasing house prices?
Because the coalition government has a policy of building more homes. Of course, we need to build more homes as our population grows, as our living patterns change. We need more houses, and the coalition government is building those homes.
I think it is right to help first-time buyers. I do hope that you can get a chance to get on the housing ladder, because lots of people haven't been given that chance because house prices have just risen so fast, and it's been hard to get mortgages and to get the opportunity to get on the housing ladder. So I think it is right to help first-time buyers. I think it would be better if the Bank of England looked at this straight away and looked at this more frequently. I think that would be a sensible way to make sure that you look at these risks in terms of getting the details right and actually the impact on the wider economy. And I do think as well it won't work unless we build more homes.
We are building.
And well, actually you're not. You've had, at the lowest level of house building since the 1920s, not just in the financial crisis. Of course, everybody understands the housing market was hit by a global financial crisis. But in the last 3 years, since the financial crisis was over, we've had drops in the numbers of houses being built. That is a huge problem, building up huge problems for the future. And I think the final thought I would have on it is that the government needs to really answer about whether they are targeting this most most effectively because they are using it also to subsidise mortgages going up to £600,000. Now, that is 4 times the average house price here in Birmingham, and I'm not sure it's really on the target of most first-time buyers.
All right. You, sir.
If you throw more money at the same number of houses, the price will go up in a bubble. There was a proposal from Ed Miliband to force builders who are sitting on empty land to build. He was accused by the Tories of being Stalinist.
Yeah, well, don't you think it is, sir? If somebody owns land and the government takes that land off them, I don't think that's the action of a free society. Now, you may want...
Can't they buy it off them?
What, I beg your pardon?
Can't they buy it off them?
They do.
Well,
it doesn't have to be nationalisation.
But that might incur a very grievous loss for them if they bought it at a high market and the land values have gone down.
But compulsory purchase orders already exist. It is already possible
like
for
everything, the
councils
solution is always more
for,
spending,
for the government
more borrowing,
to be able
more
to
debt.
do that.
Yeah.
The question is, how long do you sit by and wait if companies aren't building houses, if organisations aren't doing their bit? We've got to have action right across the board in order to get more homes. Otherwise, you won't do anything.
Who's going to build the houses that the developer doesn't want to build?
Well, I think
developer X says, I don't want to do it at the moment. You buy it, then what happens?
Well, you have all kinds of people are involved in building homes at the moment. So you have private sector companies that are involved, you have housing associations that are involved, you have local councils that are involved, you have, consortiums often and organisations of developers that build homes. There is an appetite to build, but you've got to get that action going, and the government hasn't done that.
Sorry, Eva, I was trying to get in earlier. It's always been a problem, first-time buying. I was 25, I was quite lucky, and I bought my first place as a basement flat next to Paddington Station with a pull-down bed, and it promptly lost 1/3 of its value because there was a housing slump. So there's a danger in buying a place sometimes, and the difficulty with housing is it's not a sure investment. It can be hazardous. It's very important to people to have their own place, of course it is. But what I would prefer the government to do, if it's going to spend money on things like this, I would prefer them to get rid of stamp duty and to take the tax out, because stamp duty is a really vicious tax.
All right.
If they're going to do something, then
thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring you to an end. Grant Shapps, you have 30 seconds because we've run out of time here.
Very simply, Eva, this scheme is meant for somebody like you who wants to go out and be able to purchase a house, but rather than having to save 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pounds deposit, it means you can get the 90 or 95% mortgages, which have largely disappeared from the marketplace. It worked for many years. It won't create a boom because we've got the Bank of England to put a check on it, and because this is only 2% of the transactions that will take place every year. For both those reasons, I may say to the woman in red, it is an example of how we're going to help hard-working families.
OK.
Thank
you very much.
Be homeless.
Mehdi,
They're under 25.
And I'm sorry, but your interventions will have to do for that answer.
I'll take that.
People can refer to the Huffington Post to see what you say in the morning.
We haven't had enough of Mehdi.
Our time's up, I'm afraid. We're going to be in Cambridge next week. We have Diane Abbott for Labour, we have Joe Swinson for the Liberal Democrats, Kwasi Kwarteng for the Tories. That's in Cambridge, and after that we're going to be in Basingstoke the following week. Now, if you want to take part, put questions to the panel, argue with them and all the rest of it, go to our website or apply to 0330 123 9988. Call that number, but the website probably is a bit better, and there's the website address. If you're tuned to BBC 5 Live, Radio 5 Live, you can continue this debate, as ever, on Question Time, Extra Time. But as for the studio, our discussion ends. My thanks to our panel, to all of you who came here to take part. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.